Hi folks, Seth Leapson here. Thanks for watching my monologue. In these uncertain times, you may be thinking about personal protection. If you are, I urge you to visit my friends at Guns Etc. They'll help you find the perfect protection for yourself and your family, and they can even teach you how to use it. They've been protecting Arizonans for over 33 years, and they stand for the great principles this country was founded upon. Or you can just click on gunsetcetera.com. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back, January 15th, 2021. Bear with me here. I'm going to go a little historical, but I'll bring it right up to our present crisis. 234 years ago tomorrow, the Virginia legislature passed the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, authored by Thomas Jefferson. Its importance cannot be understated, though. It is too frequently and commonly forgotten. Understanding its import gets us to some of what we discussed yesterday, the embrace or re-embracing of our natural rights, understanding of our founding, and thus our conservatism. It states, quote, "No man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship place or ministry whatsoever, nor shall be enforced, restrained, molested, or burdened in his body or goods, nor shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious opinions or belief, but that all men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinion in matters of religion, and that the same shall in no wise diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil capacities." It also states, "And though we well know that this assembly elected by the people for the ordinary purposes of legislation only have no power to restrain the act of succeeding assemblies, constituted with powers equal to our own, and that therefore to declare this act to be irrevocable would be of no effect in law, yet we are free to declare and do declare that the rights hereby asserted are of the natural rights of mankind. And if any act shall be hereafter passed to repeal the present or to narrow its operation, such as would be an infringement of natural right." Close quote. Do we understand how important and fundamental those two provisions are? In understanding our founding as the best regime, as Harry Jaffa did, because we wedded civil liberty to religious liberty, he wrote, "The social contract theory of the Declaration of Independence and the doctrine of religious liberty in the Virginia Statute, both authored by Jefferson, are two sides of one coin. The rights with which all men are by nature equally endowed qualify any man to enter into agreement with any other man to form a civil society. Much of this understanding, we will see, is precisely what informs so much of our abhorrence to mob rule and anarchy, something we conservatives have understood and been talking about for a long time, something the left only uses when convenient and as a battering ram to attack conservatives." I borrow liberally from what Harry Jaffa wrote here. In the single sentence that is the First Amendment, the religious guarantees come first. The guarantees after the semicolon, speech, press, assembly, petition, are all active elements in the political process and are intended to provide for its integrity. Freedom of religion is understood to be necessary for the integrity of the political process in the negative sense that such questions as what religion should be established would be an intolerable burden on that process. Civil and religious liberty are distinct, yet it is good that we regard them as inseparable. Their bonding is in a peculiar sense the achievement, exclusive achievement, or original achievement of the United States of America. The constitutionalism of our founding is inseparable from its moral realism and natural theology. Alexis de Tocqueville, praised the effect of disestablishment in America and called religion the first of our political institutions precisely because of that. By removing theological differences from the political arena, men could worship God freely according to the dictates of their consciences. But however differently they might conceive of the divine attributes, or however different the forms of worship which in their eyes were pleasing to God, there was a common understanding of morality underlying or transcending religious differences. By strengthening our moral consensus, disestablishment promoted confidence and even friendship among citizens. By doing so, it promoted a regime in which the rule of the majority might be consistent with the rights of the minority. In the Virginia statute, it states, quote, "Our civil rights have no dependence on our religious opinions any more than our opinions in physics or geometry." While the Virginia law of 1786 applied only to Virginia, its argument became in time the basis not only of federal law, but the law of all 50 states. It was clear to the founders that a system of majority rule was impossible if the majority had the power to decide in what way its citizens would worship God. No Catholic could be compelled by a majority to become a Protestant, or vice versa. No Jew could be compelled by a majority to become a Christian, or vice versa. Only by removing all such questions of religious belief from the political process was government by majority rule possible. A man's relationship to his maker ought to be exempt equally from the fears and temptations of politics. Pope John Paul II once put it that the fundamental right to religious freedom is the guarantee of every other human right. But we are not in that place now, are we? Not today. Religious belief and practice has been scorned, and so too the notion of majority rule and minority rights, especially minority political rights, the first of which is not only religion but speech. I can't help but think some of the scenes and talk we see out of Washington, D.C. and the warnings about violence are being used in part to put a further mark on conservatives, a mark of Cain, that prospective violence is all our fault, almost as if the show of force and National Guard are there to protect Washington, D.C. from just Republicans and conservatives. But again, my memory runs a little longer than 10 days ago. It runs at least to 2.5 months ago, November. Anyone remember all the stories about stores boarding up in advance of the election? If you go back and read the stories, there are a ton. It's rather quaint that they don't mention the one obvious thing the businesses were worried about. But having gone through the summer of love, $2 billion worth of damage, the businesses were worried about riots if Donald Trump won, and not from his supporters. The New Yorker wrote in November, quote, "It is not a promising sign for democracy that New York City prepared for a presidential election as if it were a hurricane. In Manhattan, as Tuesday approached, entire blocks were shuttered," close quote. The New York Times wrote this, quote, "The windows of Saks Fifth Avenue and the iconic Macy's and Herald Square, which have wowed tourists for decades, were boarded up on Monday morning. Soho, where trendy shoppers once flocked to glittering stores, echoed with the sound of hammers and power saws. The sidewalk outside the Disney store in Times Square was filled not with captivated children sporting mouse ears, but with workers attaching plywood to the storefront. On the eve of Election Day, stores in New York City's best-known shopping district, eerily hushed in the face of a global pandemic, were boarding up their windows for potential unrest tied to a bitterly contested presidential race," close quote. The story then described similar scenes in California and other states. The story, however, only gave the slightest of indications of where the prospective rioting and looting would come from. Quote, "Some businesses in New York City are particularly on edge and bracing for another potential blow, given a brief rash of vandalism and looting that took place at the beginning of protests over the summer," close quote. It then mentions one BLM protester who was arrested. But that's still pretty rich. A brief rash of vandalism and looting. It was 6 riots a day for 3 months. Blazing fires, hundreds of cops injured, 30 people killed. And Chris Cuomo saying, "Who said all protests had to be peaceful?" And very little, if any, discernible denunciation from Democratic Party leaders. In fact, the incumbent vice president said the protests, knowing well what they were turning into, should not stop, and helped bail out those who were arrested. But today, as the transfer of power takes place in Washington, D.C., all the worry and all the show of force Nancy Pelosi condemned last summer, the show of force she condemned last summer, is said to be needed because of Republicans or conservatives or supporters of the president, because they're violent. I'm for, and we have all long been for, law enforcement, peace, tranquility, non-riotous behavior, the rule of law, not the rule of the mob. That's why we all denounce so strongly what happened last week. But let us not ignore the effort here, a permanent mark of Cain, that we conservatives are dangerous because our words are dangerous, that we are violent as our words constitute violence. It started last week by charging Donald Trump with incitement to violence by a standard that has never been used before, ever. And it started a lot earlier with the claims of speech as violence when the speech is conservative on our campuses. Here's the deal. Speech is not violence. Violence is violence. Mobs and anarchy and looting and rioting have long been denounced by us, not just last week, not just last summer, but as far long back as history goes. Law and order were part of the Goldwater campaign, the Nixon campaign, the Reagan campaign, and the Trump campaign. So we come to a sad and grave irony. While Donald Trump was impeached for incitement, one of those arrested in last week's violence is the founder of an organization called Insurgents USA. Go to their website. When you go to that organization's main website, the immediate video that comes right up, their promotional video on the home page, is a boastful and scary-looking man in front of a mob burning the American flag. Under that video in bold lettering is the phrase, "Join the revolution." That was always their language and their behavior, not ours. We want to save the original revolution based on natural rights. They want to change it, in fact, starting with changing the date, not us. And so the irony, all the implications and imprecations against our movement writ large for inciting violence. And so with the arrest of the founder of Insurgents USA, you have imperfect relief all the left wants us to forget, and yet cannot quite 1984 memory hole-like eradicate. The toleration of political violence that led to everything Lincoln warned about, that we've warned about. The acceptance of two forms of justice and law. As Lincoln put it, the lawless in spirit are encouraged to become lawless in practice and have been used to no restraint, but dread of punishment, thus they become absolutely unrestrained. Having ever regarded government as their deadliest bane, he says, they make a jubilee of the suspension of its operations and pray for nothing so much as its total annihilation. While on the other hand, good men who love tranquility, who desire to abide by the laws and enjoy their benefits, who would gladly spill their blood in the defense of their country, seeing their property destroyed, their families insulted, and their lives endangered, their persons injured, and seeing nothing in prospect that forebodes a change for the better, they become tired of and disgusted with a government that offers them no protection, and are not much averse to a change in which they imagine they have nothing left to lose. Close quote. Abraham Lincoln, 1838. What we were quoting all last summer. Lincoln warned against this. Those were his words. We've warned. And because the warnings went unheeded, the final irony is it is we conservatives, we who took this the most seriously, who are now being blamed for violence, all of us. Let's let them get away with it. And while at it, maybe we should all hand out Tom Cotton's New York Times op-ed that led to such an internal combustion at the paper that the editor was fired. Do recall what it was about. Using federal force to put down riots. But then again, those riots were much longer, much bigger, much more widespread, and much more supported by Democrats. I'm Seth Leipson. We'll be right back.